On my birthday, my dad put a copper necklace around my neck and gently said, "It'll always protect you, sweetheart." My husband just smirked and mocked it. "It's just some ugly old thing." He was always trying to make me take it off, but I wore it for years. Then one morning, after stepping out of the shower, I looked down and froze. The necklace was gone. While I was desperately searching the floor and drawers for it, my phone suddenly rang inside my jacket pocket. It was my dad. "Stop looking for it. Take your daughter and leave now. Your brother's waiting downstairs." I went completely still. Before we go any further, thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from, your country or city. I love knowing who is on the other side of the screen. Note this story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and education. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but the message inside is worth keeping. The steam in the bathroom had not fully cleared when I stepped out. I reached for the small oak box on the left side of the vanity, the way I reached for it every single morning, without looking, without thinking, the gesture as automatic as breathing. My fingers found the velvet lining, then nothing. I looked down. The box was open and empty. The copper necklace was gone. My first instinct was completely rational. I checked the counter. I checked the floor around the vanity, running my fingers along the grout lines between the tiles. I pulled the bath mat back and checked beneath it. Nothing. I opened the cabinet under the sink, thinking perhaps it had slipped off the edge and fallen. The cabinet held only spare soap and a bottle of the lavender hand lotion Caleb had picked up for me the previous month, back when he was still performing the small gestures with full commitment. No necklace. I straightened up and looked at myself in the mirror. The fog from the shower had not fully cleared the glass, and for a moment my reflection was slightly blurred, the edges of my face soft and uncertain in a way that my face never actually was. I pressed my fingers to my collarbone. 11 years of wearing that necklace had left a faint impression in my skin, a shallow groove that I only noticed in moments like this one. It felt exposed in a way I could not name yet, though something at the base of my spine was already beginning to understand. I put on my robe and walked to the bedroom doorway. The door to Ivy's room across the hall was cracked open the way I always left it, the soft amber glow of her nightlight visible through the gap. She was still asleep. I could hear the quiet, even rhythm of her breathing from where I stood. 5 years old and completely untouched by anything that was happening inside the walls of this apartment. I needed to keep it that way. I was still standing in the doorway when I heard Caleb's footsteps on the hallway floor. He appeared around the corner, carrying a tray, moving with the unhurried ease of a man who had nowhere urgent to be and nothing on his conscience. On the tray was my mug, the wide ceramic one, with a small chip on the handle that I had kept for years, because I had never gotten around to replacing it. Steam rose from the surface in thin, curling threads. Honey tea. He made it for me every evening without fail, had made it since the first winter of our marriage, when I mentioned offhandedly that it helped me sleep. I used to think of it as a small, private kindness, one of the accumulations of tenderness that make up a life shared with another person. He smiled when he saw me. It was a good smile. Warm at the corners, slightly self-conscious, in the way that had made me trust him in the beginning, as though he was always a little surprised to find himself loved. He had an extraordinary face for sincerity. "You're out early," he said, setting the tray on the nightstand. "I was going to bring this to you." "My necklace is missing," I said it plainly, watching him. He paused, then turned toward the bathroom doorway. "Your necklace." He said it back to me the way people repeat a word when they are buying themselves time to arrange their expression. Then he walked into the bathroom and looked at the vanity opened. The cabinet glanced at the floor. His performance was competent, not flawless. A person who is genuinely looking for something moves differently than a person who is pretending to look for something. The body holds the knowledge it is trying to conceal. After 11 years of studying how materials behave under pressure, how a crack in a painting's varnish tells you everything about what happened to it before you arrived, I had learned to read objects the way other people read faces. And Caleb Thorne was not looking for my necklace. He was looking at me to measure how alarmed I was. I don't see it, he said, coming back into the bedroom. Did you maybe leave it in the studio or at your dad's last weekend? I never take it off, I kept my voice level. You know that. Briar. He came to where I was standing and placed both hands on my shoulders. His thumbs moved in the slow, circular motion along the muscle near my collarbone that I had once described to him as the exact place I held my tension. He had remembered. He had always remembered everything I told him, and I had spent 4 years calling that attentiveness love. It's just a necklace. We'll find it. And if we can't, I'll take you to get something better, something that actually suits you. He said the last sentence with a small, affectionate smile. The kind that implied my attachment to the copper piece was mildly endearing and mildly irrational in equal measure. Something that actually suits you. I had heard variations of that line before in our marriage. Replacing things, improving things, gently, continuously repositioning me and my choices until I could no longer remember clearly which preferences had originally been mine. His hands were warm. The pressure was precise, the same pressure every time applied to the same coordinates with the reliability of a calibrated instrument. I had spent years thinking that consistency was the signature of genuine care. Standing there in my robe with his hands on my shoulders and my necklace gone, I began to reframe it as something else entirely. You're right, I said. I probably left it somewhere. I stepped back from his hands gently, so the movement registered as tiredness rather than withdrawal. Let me check my coat pockets. I think I may have put it there on Sunday. He nodded and picked up the tea tray. Get warm first. I'll check the studio if you want. He left the room. I waited until the sound of his footsteps had moved far enough down the hallway, then I crossed to the armchair in the corner where I had draped my jacket the night before. I slid my hand into the inside pocket. My fingers closed around my phone. I looked at the screen. One missed call, my father. I pressed my back against the wall of the bedroom closet and called my father back. He picked up before the first ring had finished. Briar. His voice was stripped of every quality that usually made it his. No warmth, no comfort. Nothing left but the bare frame of a man who needed his child to move. In 60 years of living, Arthur Vance had faced collapsed markets, federal investigations, and the kind of boardroom betrayals that ended careers. I had never once heard his voice shake. Not when my mother died. Not when his flagship company lost 30% of its value in a single trading session. Not once. It was shaking now, and the sound of it sent a cold wire straight through my chest before he had said a single word more. I need you to stay very calm and listen to me. My hand tightened around the phone so hard my knuckles ached. Dad, what's happening? Where is my necklace? The necklace did its job. A pause, and I could hear him drawing a slow, controlled breath on the other end, the deliberate breathing of a man who needed his voice to work correctly and was not willing to let it fail. When the signal was blocked, the blackout protocol activated. The internal microphone engaged and transmitted everything within a 5-meter radius directly to my server. Briar, I have the recording. I need you to listen to it right now. The room tilted. Not metaphorically, I mean the physical room. The small, dark closet with its smell of cedar and dry, cleaned fabric tilted in my perception the way the world tilts when the ground beneath it turns out to be something other than ground. My free hand reached out and found the wall pressing flat against the cool plaster to keep myself upright. My fingernails dug into it. Play it. I said, though, what I actually meant was, please don't play it. Please tell me this is something ordinary. Please tell me the necklace just fell behind the radiator, and this is a 2-minute conversation that ends with me feeling foolish and relieved. My father played it. The first voice I heard was Caleb's. And I want to be precise about what was wrong with it because the wrongness was so total that my mind initially rejected it the way the body rejects a foreign substance. A violent cellular refusal. It was Caleb's voice, the same vocal cords, the same cadence I had listened to across 4 years of dinner tables and Saturday mornings and darkened bedrooms when he thought I was asleep. The same voice that had read me the first chapter of 3 separate novels because I always fell asleep before the end, and he always kept reading. that exact voice. But every quality that made it his was gone. No warmth, no lightness, no the particular soft register he used when he was trying to make me laugh. The voice in the recording was flat and surgical, like a man reading coordinates off a map, like a man who had looked at the thing he was doing and had decided it was a logistics problem. The sedative needs to be at full dose by morning. I'll tell her it's a new blend from the wellness shop. She won't question it. She never questions the tea. My stomach dropped so hard I felt it in my feet. Then came a voice that turned my insides in a different direction entirely. Mrs. Thorne, my mother-in-law. The woman who had called me her golden daughter-in-law at every family dinner for 4 years, who had squeezed my hand at our wedding and whispered that I was the best thing that had ever happened to her son, who had cried actual tears at the rehearsal dinner and pressed her cheek against mine at the reception and said she had always wanted a daughter exactly like me. Her voice in the recording was brisk and businesslike, the voice of a woman discussing the logistics of a shipment. Make sure the dosage is strong enough that she can't resist or speak clearly when they bring her in. And Caleb, do not forget the trust documents need to be ready before she comes around fully. We only get one clean window. I know, Mother. Caleb's recorded voice carried the mild irritation of someone managing a detail he had already accounted for. I've had the documents drafted for 6 weeks. And the girl? Mrs. Thorne's voice dropped slightly, the way voices do when they reach a subject that even the speaker finds uncomfortable to name directly. What about Ivy? She stays. She's leverage if it comes to that. But it won't come to that. A pause. By the time Breyer is coherent enough to call anyone, the paperwork will already be filed. My knees buckled completely. I caught myself on the clothing rack, both hands grabbing the bar, and a row of hangers slid and rattled with a sound that seemed enormous in the small space, and I pressed my fist against my mouth so hard I tasted the iron of the skin on my knuckles. My eyes were burning with tears I absolutely could not afford right now. Not here, not with 8 inches of wood between me and the hallway where Caleb Thorne was standing with a tray of poisoned tea, and I blinked them back so fiercely it felt like pulling them in by force of will alone. My chest was caving inward, my ribs pressing against something that was not air. 4 years. 4 years of honey tea and warm hands on my shoulders in exactly the right place. And I love you and you work too hard, and let me take care of that, and I would never let anything happen to you. 6 weeks. He had the documents drafted for 6 weeks. Ivy's name. He had said Ivy's name in a sentence about leverage. Something happened inside me in that moment that I will not try to fully describe. It was not grief, and it was not rage, and it was not fear. It was the sound all 3 of those things make when they arrive simultaneously and fuse into something with different properties than any of them alone. Something colder, something that knew exactly what it needed to do next. Breyer. My father's voice came back on the line raw and tight and stripped down to its most essential element, which was a parent trying to protect his child from a distance. Listen to me. Do not look for the necklace. Do not pack anything. Do not give him any reason at all to suspect you have heard this. I need you to get Ivy and walk out of that apartment right now. Dominic is already 2 blocks away. He is waiting. Dad? My voice cracked down the middle. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek until the crack sealed itself over. Breyer, please. The word please from Arthur Vance was a thing I had heard exactly twice in my life. Both times the world had been genuinely, irreversibly ending. Go get your daughter, right now. A knock at the closet door. 3 soft, patient raps. 3 knocks from a man who was not in a hurry because he believed he had already won. And then Caleb's voice, warm and familiar as a hand I had held in hospital waiting rooms and at gravesides and in taxicabs in 3 different countries. Warm as something I had loved with my entire undivided heart. Breyer, your tea is getting cold, sweetheart. Are you all right in there? My heart slammed against my ribs, so hard I was certain he could hear it through the door, through the cedar and the dry-cleaned wool, through the 8 inches of wood, and the 4 years of carefully constructed performance that stood between us. My hands were shaking. My legs felt as though someone had quietly removed the structural elements from them. There were 4 years of a marriage I had believed in pressing down on my sternum, with the full, accumulated weight of everything I had chosen to trust. I took one breath. I found the stillest place inside myself, the place I went when a restoration was going wrong and panic would permanently damage the work. The place where my hands stopped shaking and my eyes stopped burning, and all that remained was the task directly in front of me. I found it, and I stepped inside it, and I pulled the door shut behind me. "I'm fine," I called back, and my voice came out steady and warm and entirely convincing. "Just looking for my cozy sweater. I'll be right out." I ended the call. I pressed both palms flat against my thighs for 3 full seconds and felt the shaking work its way out through my hands until there was nothing left in my face to show. Then I opened the closet door and smiled at my husband. It was the greatest performance of my life, and it bought me exactly the 3 minutes I needed. 3 minutes. That was what I had calculated while standing in the closet with my hands pressed against my legs, listening to my own heartbeat count down. Caleb would take the tea tray back to the kitchen. He would stand at the counter and check his phone the way he always did at this hour, scrolling through emails with the studied concentration of a man who needed to appear productive. 3 minutes, maybe 4. That was what I had between the woman I had just been in that closet and the woman I needed to be in the next 30 seconds. I walked out of the bedroom with my cardigan pulled loose over my shoulders, and my voice pitched at exactly the casual register of a woman who had simply remembered something she needed. Every step was placed with the specific deliberateness of someone who understood that the wrong sound at the wrong moment could change everything. "I'm going to take a quick walk," I said, stopping at the end of the hallway. "Get some air. I've had a tension headache since I woke up, and I think the cold will help." Caleb looked up from the kitchen counter. His expression shifted through concern in the particular fluid way it always did, concern assembled rather than felt, each component appearing in the correct sequence at the correct speed. The slightly furrowed brow, the softening around the eyes, the body turning toward me by degrees. I had watched that sequence hundreds of times and called it love. Standing at the end of the hallway with the recording still living in my ears, I watched it and understood it for the mechanism it had always been. "I'll come with you," he said, already setting his phone down. "No, please." I shook my head and managed a small, tired smile that reached exactly the right depth and went no further. "I just need 10 minutes alone with the cold air. You know how I get. I'll be back before the tea's even finished steeping." I crossed to where he was standing and patted his arm as I passed him, the light, familiar touch of a woman who has touched the same arm 1,000 times and is not thinking about it. "Go watch something. You've been on your feet all day." He held my gaze for 1 second longer than was comfortable. I held it back. I let my eyes be tired and affectionate and completely empty of everything that was actually happening inside my chest. Then he nodded. "Okay, take your coat, it's cold out." "I will," I said. I walked to the entryway. I did not take my coat. The moment I turned the corner of the hallway and heard the television click on in the living room, I moved. Not running. Running makes sound and sound travels, and there were only 8 feet of hallway between the living room and the bedroom, and Caleb Thorne had excellent hearing when it suited him. I moved the way I moved through a conservation lab when the air itself felt fragile, each step placed with the precision of someone who understood that the wrong pressure in the wrong place could crack something irreplaceable, something that could not be put back. I pushed open the door to Ivy's room. She was asleep on her side, one arm curled around the small stuffed rabbit that had been her constant companion since she was 2 years old. Her hair had come loose from its braid and spread across the pillow in dark waves, and her mouth was open just slightly, the deep, unguarded, open-mouthed sleep of a child who felt completely safe. The nightlight cast a circle of amber warmth across the side of her face, and in that warmth she looked so young, so entirely untouched by anything that had happened in the rooms around her tonight, that looking at her was briefly like looking at something too bright to hold. Something in my chest tore open so cleanly and so completely that I had to press my fist against my sternum just to hold myself together. She felt safe. She felt safe because she did not know what was in the tea, and she did not know what her father had been planning, and she did not know that tomorrow morning was going to be the end of everything she had believed about the word home. She did not know that the man who read her bedtime stories and always did the voices had said her name in a sentence about leverage. She did not know any of it, and for the remaining minutes of this night, that was exactly how it needed to stay. "Baby," I whispered, sliding one arm beneath her and lifting her against my chest with the careful, practiced motion of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She was heavier than she used to be, solid and warm in the way children become when they are genuinely deeply asleep, all that small body's weight given over completely to trust. I pulled her blanket around her with my free hand and tucked it under her chin and held her against me and breathed. She stirred. Her eyes opened halfway unfocused and velvet soft with sleep, the eyes of someone returning from somewhere very far away. "Mommy!" Her voice was barely a breath. "Shh." I pressed my lips to her temple. My eyes were burning so fiercely I could barely see. "We're going on an adventure, a secret one. Close your eyes." "Close." "Secret," she murmured and closed her eyes again with the complete trusting compliance of a 5-year-old who had never had a reason to doubt me. The faith in it, the absolute uncomplicated faith of that single word nearly undid me entirely. I carried her down the hallway to the balcony door off the guest room. The Virginia creeper grew up the iron trellis outside the window, its autumn leaves already stripped bare by the November cold. My hands remembered the metal even before I touched it, the same rungs I had climbed on a dare during a college party years ago. But tonight, there was no laughter. My hands remembered the metal even before I touched it. Cold, slightly rough solid in the way old iron always is, built to hold. Ivy tightened her arms around my neck as I swung one leg over the railing and found the first rung with my foot. My house slippers were thin cotton, completely inadequate for this, and the metal was ice beneath the sole. The night air hit my face and arms immediately sharp and clean, and smelling of the first edges of winter. I gripped the trellis with both hands, shifted Ivy's weight against my shoulder, and breathed once slowly all the way down. Then I climbed. Each rung was an exact decision. Each movement deliberate, balanced the weight of the child against my chest, redistributed with every step. Ivy's head was tucked into the curve of my neck, her breath warm against my collarbone, her fingers loosely fisted in the fabric of my cardigan. She did not wake. She trusted the motion completely, the way she trusted everything I did without question, without evidence, on the single fact of who I was to her. The moment my feet touched the wet grass of the garden, a sound escaped me that I had not planned. Not quite a cry and not quite a laugh, something without a precise name, a single involuntary exhale of something so enormous that my body simply could not hold it anymore and released it like pressure from a sealed container. Ivy's weight was solid and warm against my chest. The grass was cold and wet through my slippers, soaking the cotton immediately. The night air smelled like rain and dark earth, and something green and alive and entirely real. Then from the far corner of the private drive, a pair of headlights blinked twice. "Dominic!" I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep in the sound that tried to escape at the sight of those lights. My legs were shaking so hard I could feel it all the way up through my spine and into my jaw. I had made it. I took one step toward the car, and then the window directly above me flooded with light. I did not look back up at the window. I ran. Not the clean, controlled movement I had used coming down the trellis. This was pure instinct, barefoot on wet grass, running Ivy pressed against my chest with both arms, and my slippers leaving the garden behind entirely because I could not afford to care about them. I reached the Bentley, and Dominic had the rear door already open from the inside, leaning across the seat with an expression on his face I had not seen since the year he spent working federal organized crime cases. The expression of a man who has looked at something truly evil and is choosing with great deliberate effort to remain functional. "Get in," he said. I got in. He pulled the door shut and the car moved before I had even properly seated myself. "Dom." My voice came out wrong. Too thin. Ivy stirred against my chest and made a small sound of complaint, and I rubbed her back in slow circles and tried again. Dom the window. Did he? He saw the garden light come on and turned on the bedroom light. Dominic said, his eyes fixed on the road, his hands completely steady on the wheel, in a way that suggested they were steady by sheer will alone. He'll go to Ivy's room next, then he'll realize. By the time he does, we'll be on the expressway. He exhaled sharply through his nose. Dad has already been watching the building's camera feed for the last 40 minutes. Caleb is not going to follow you. The sob I had been holding since the closet finally broke free. It came out of me as a single ugly, heaving thing completely involuntary, and I pressed my face into the top of Ivy's hair and gripped her so tightly she whimpered and shifted against me. I forced myself to loosen my arms. I forced myself to breathe. Ivy resettled and sighed and went still again with the miraculous adaptability of the deeply sleepy, and I sat in the back of my brother's car with tears running freely down my face and the cold night pulling away outside the windows. 4 years, I said. The words tasted like something rotten. Dom, 4 years. I know, his voice was a leash around something enormous. He made me tea every single night. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth. My chin was shaking. Every night for 4 years. He knew which blend I liked. He remembered that I didn't want honey on Tuesdays because of the thing with my stomach. My voice fractured completely. I took 3 seconds to pull it back. He was putting scopolamine in it for 3 weeks, and I just drank it. I thanked him for it, Dom. I told him it was one of my favorite things about being married to him. Briar. Dominic's voice cracked on my name like a fault line giving way. He cleared his throat hard. I swear to God, I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure that man never has a comfortable day again. Get in line behind me, I said, and something in my voice surprised both of us. It was not grief anymore. It was colder than grief, harder edged the temperature of the thing grief becomes when you are a person who has spent your career understanding that damage is only the beginning of the story. What you do with it is everything. Ivy stirred again. Her eyes opened clearer this time, the sleep beginning to lift. She looked up at me in the dim passing light of the highway lamps, and her small face moved through confusion and then settled into the uncomplicated certainty of a child who sees her mother and decides everything is fine. Mommy, you're crying, she said, reaching up and pressing her tiny palm flat against my cheek. The breath that came out of me then was half a laugh and half the most painful thing I had ever felt. A little bit, I admitted. But I'm okay, baby girl, I promise. Did you hurt yourself? She was studying my face with grave, serious attention the way she studied things that mattered to her, not the kind of hurt that doesn't get better. I turned my face and kissed her palm. Her hands smelled like lavender baby wash and the specific warmth of a sleeping child. I held on to that smell like it was a rope. Go back to sleep. We're going to Grandpa Arthur's house. Her eyes went wide with the instant delighted energy that the words Grandpa Arthur's house reliably produced. With the dog? With the dog, Dominic confirmed from the front seat, and there was a roughness in his voice that had not been there a moment before. Ivy made a sound of profound satisfaction and tucked her face back against my shoulder. Within 40 seconds, she was breathing the long, slow rhythms of someone genuinely asleep. I looked out the window. The city was thinning around us, the dense orange grid of Back Bay, giving way to the darker margins of the expressway. Somewhere behind us, Caleb Thorne had just walked into his daughter's empty room. I looked at the back of my brother's head. How many lawyers does Dad have on call tonight? All of them, Dominic said. Every single one. The story is now reaching truths beyond imagination. To let me know you're still standing with Briar in this battle, please comment on the number 1 below. And please note the following scenes contain certain fictional elements to heighten the drama. If you feel this is not for you, you may stop the video right here. But if you're ready, let's begin the most brutal chapter. The iron gates of the Vance estate closed behind us with a sound I felt in my chest before I heard it. A heavy final clang that said you are inside now, and nothing that followed you here can reach you. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. The main house was fully lit. Every window on the ground floor blazed against the dark, and I could see the shadow of my father moving through the foyer before the car had even stopped on the gravel drive. Dominic opened my door. I stepped out carrying Ivy, who had woken somewhere on the last stretch of road and was now looking at the lit-up house with the bright, wondering eyes of a child who did not yet understand anything, except that Grandpa's house was large and full of interesting things, and the dog was somewhere inside it. Arthur Vance was on the front steps before I reached them. He did not say anything right away. He was 60 years old, and had the posture of a man who had never once in his adult life permitted himself to fold. But when he looked at me standing on his steps in cotton slippers, with wet grass stains on the hem of my robe, and his granddaughter on my hip, something in his face broke open in a way I had never seen before. He crossed the remaining distance between us in 3 steps and wrapped both arms around me, pulling Ivy and me against him together. And he held on with the specific, desperate grip of a father who has been sitting in a control room listening to evidence of his child's danger for the past 2 hours, and has had absolutely no way to do anything about it until this exact moment. "You're home," he said into my hair. His voice was wrecked, completely wrecked. My eyes flooded instantly, and I pressed my face against his shoulder and held on. "I'm home, Dad." We stood like that for exactly 4 seconds. Then Arthur straightened, cleared his throat, pressed one firm kiss to the top of my head, and shifted into the mode I had watched him operate in my entire life. The mode where grief became fuel. "The medical team is in the sitting room," he said, taking Ivy from my arms with practiced ease. Ivy immediately grabbed his lapel and said, "Grandpa, where is Biscuit?" with the urgent seriousness of someone with real priorities, and Arthur answered, "In the kitchen waiting to see you," with a steadiness that cost him more than it appeared to. He carried Ivy inside. I followed. A woman in navy scrubs met me at the sitting room doorway with a blood draw kit already prepared. Her name tag read, Dr. Christine Yao. "Miss Vance," she said, calm and direct, "I'll make this quick. Left arm, please." I sat down on the arm of the nearest chair and rolled up my sleeve without breaking stride. The needle went in, and while Dr. Yao worked, I looked straight ahead at the hallway, where I could hear Ivy's delighted shriek of "Biscuit," followed by the rapid thumping of the golden retriever's whole back half wagging in greeting. The sound of it hit me so hard my throat closed completely, and I pressed my lips together and breathed through my nose until the moment passed. "Done," Dr. Yao said, pressing a square of gauze to the inside of my elbow. "Results within 8 hours, forensic standard." "6 if you can manage it," I said. "Please." She looked at me steadily. 6, she agreed. The library was already a war room. Silas Montgomery sat at the head of the long mahogany table, with 2 laptops open, a yellow legal pad covered in handwriting, and a coffee that had clearly been there long enough to be cold. He was 55 years old, built like a man who had decided somewhere in his 40s that comfort was overrated, and he looked up at me over the rims of his glasses with an expression that said he had been ready for this conversation for at least an hour. "Briar," he said, "tell me everything you want." "Everything Caleb Thorne owns," I said, sitting down across from him. "His accounts, his gallery licenses, his corporate registrations, everything." Silas turned one of the laptops to face me. I pulled it closer and started working through the files. Arthur's team had been thorough. 3 years of Caleb's financial records were laid out in clean folders, and I moved through them with the mechanical focus I brought to a complicated restoration layer by layer, stripping back the surface until the structure underneath was visible. I was 40 minutes in when I found it. Caleb's gallery platform. The security and authentication system his entire operation ran on. The one he had been selling to museums and private collectors for 3 years as his own proprietary technology. "My proprietary technology." "Silas," I said. My voice was very steady and very quiet, and Silas looked up immediately because he understood that those 2 qualities together in a woman meant something significant was happening. "The prenuptial agreement. Section 14, Clause 3. Can we activate it tonight?" Silas set down his pen. "Walk me through what you found." I turned the laptop to face him. "Gem Trace," I said. "I built it. He's been selling it, and tonight I want it back." Silas read the Gem Trace licensing records twice. He was the kind of man who never read anything only once when twice would be more certain, and I had learned over the years to wait him out rather than prompt him. He turned a page. He turned it back. He took off his glasses, cleaned the lenses with the corner of his shirt, and put them back on. The prenuptial agreement, he said finally. Section 14, Clause 3. You're certain the licensing arrangement is documented there. I wrote the clause myself, I said. My attorney at the time thought I was being paranoid. I told her I was being precise. There is a difference. Silas almost smiled. Almost. Tell me the exact language. I recited it from memory the way I recited the chemical composition of linseed oil, or the specific gravity of corundum. Some things you know because you use them. Some things you know because you built them. All intellectual property developed by Briar Elaine Vance prior to or during the marriage, including but not limited to software algorithms and authentication systems, may be licensed to the spouse and affiliated business entities on a royalty-free basis at the sole discretion of the licensor. This license is revocable at any time upon written notice, with revocation taking effect no later than 48 hours after the notice is issued and received. Arthur had come into the library at some point during my recitation. He was standing near the window with his arms crossed, and when I finished, he said very quietly, "That's my girl." I felt my throat tighten again, and I looked back at the laptop screen before anything could get through the armor. "Silas," I said, "how fast can you draft the revocation notice?" "It's already drafted," Silas said, and he turned the second laptop to face me. "I started it while you were talking." He paused. "I've been Vance family counsel for 22 years, Briar. I know how you think." The notice was clean and precise and devastating. It named GemTrace by its registered patent number. It cited the prenuptial clause by section and line. It listed all 37 enterprise clients currently operating on the platform, from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts to the 3 private auction houses in New York that used it to authenticate incoming inventory. It stated clearly that in 48 hours, every license would be terminated, and every system running on GemTrace would enter unauthorized operation status. I read it once. Then I picked up my phone and typed a message to a number I had not contacted in 8 months. "Leo, it's Briar Vance. I need you to do something for me tonight. It's time to pull the plug." The response came back in under 3 minutes. Already knew this day was coming. "Give me 6 hours. I'll have the internal modification logs documented and on your lawyer's desk by sunrise. Everything he changed, every line he touched that wasn't his to touch. You have it all, Briar." And then after a brief pause, "I'm sorry it took this long for someone to do something. He's been taking credit for your work since the day he opened that gallery." Something cracked open in my chest that was not grief and not quite relief, but the particular painful warmth of being seen by someone who had watched an injustice and had been unable to stop it alone. I set the phone face down on the table and pressed my palms flat against the wood and breathed for 3 seconds. "He's in," I told Silas. "Good." Silas pulled the laptop back and made 2 final additions to the notice, his keystrokes fast and sure. "I'm attaching my firm's legal opinion and the notarized copies of the prenuptial clause as exhibits. This goes to Caleb's corporate email, the legal departments of all 37 clients, and the industry regulatory commission simultaneously." He looked up at me. "Do you want to read it one more time before it goes?" "No," I said. "I want to send it." Silas nodded once. He turned the laptop to face me and positioned the cursor over the send button. Then he moved back slightly in his chair, leaving the decision in the space between the laptop and my right hand, because he was the kind of lawyer who understood that some moments needed to belong entirely to the person who had earned them. I pressed send. The timestamp in the corner of the screen read 1:03 in the morning. The email left my outbox and traveled simultaneously to 37 inboxes, 3 regulatory databases, and 1 man's corporate server. In 48 hours, Caleb Thorne's entire platform would go dark. He didn't know yet. He was somewhere across the city, probably in Ivy's empty room, or pacing the apartment, or calling Jessica Reynolds in a panic about where I had gone. He was doing all of that completely unaware that the ground beneath his company had just been pulled away. I looked out the library window into the dark garden. The lights of the estate reflected faintly in the glass, and beyond them was nothing but night. "Sleep well," I thought. "It's the last good night you have left." I slept for 3 hours on the library sofa with my coat pulled over me like a blanket and my phone face up on the coffee table, so I would feel it if it buzzed. At some point, Arthur had come in and placed a real blanket over the coat without waking me. And the gesture was so like him, practical quiet completely without ceremony, that when I woke and found it there, my eyes went hot for a moment before I got them under control. It was 8:47 in the morning. My phone had 63 notifications. I sat up and opened the first one. Then I opened the app it had come from and read what Caleb Thorne had posted to his public social media accounts at 6:12 that morning, while I was asleep on this sofa, and Ivy was sleeping down the hall in the room my mother had once used as a sewing room. The photo was our wedding picture. We were standing on the steps of the venue, Caleb in his dark suit with his arm around my waist, both of us laughing at something just off camera. I remembered that moment. I remembered what we were laughing at. A pigeon had landed on the officiant's hat during the ceremony and refused to leave, and we had been quietly losing our composure about it for the entire reception. It was a real laugh in the photograph, which made it the perfect photograph for what Caleb needed it to do. The caption read, "Last night my wife Briar left our home without warning and hasn't been in contact since. She has been dealing with some significant mental health challenges recently, and I am terrified for her safety. If anyone has seen her or knows where she might be, please reach out. Briar, if you see this, I love you. The lights are always on. Please just come home." The comments were a wall of sympathy. "Stay strong. Praying for your family. What a devoted husband. Mental illness is so unpredictable, you never know. She's lucky to have someone fighting for her." I was still reading when Dominic walked in carrying 2 mugs of coffee and saw the expression on my face. He set the mugs down, took the phone from my hand, read the post, and then said a word that I will not repeat loudly enough that Biscuit lifted his head from the rug in alarm. "Dom," I kept my voice low. "Ivy is down the hall." "I know where Ivy is." Dominic's jaw was so tight I could see the muscle working in his cheek. He thrust the phone back at me. "He posted your wedding photo, Briar. He is using your wedding photo to tell 6,000 people that you had a mental breakdown." "I know what he did. And you're just going to—" He stopped himself, breathed, tried again. "Tell me you're going to do something about this." "I'm going to do something about this," I said. "I'm just not going to do it the way he wants me to." The sound of small feet on the hallway floor announced Ivy before she appeared in the doorway. She was still in her pajamas, her hair a glorious disaster from sleep. Biscuit already abandoning the rug to go and press his large golden head against her knees. She looked at the two of us with the sharp, instinctive radar of a 5-year-old who can detect tension in a room the way some people detect weather. "Why does Uncle Dom look angry?" she asked. "Uncle Dom is fine," Dominic said, and the speed at which he rearranged his entire face was genuinely impressive. "Uncle Dom just really needed his coffee and forgot to drink it. Come here, you." He scooped her up and she erupted in giggles and grabbed his hair. I watched them and felt the thing in my chest pull in 2 directions simultaneously. The love of it and the grief of it both at full volume at the same time was almost more than I could hold upright. "Mommy," Ivy said from Dominic's arms. "I saw Daddy on Grandpa's TV in the kitchen. He looked sad. Why was he on TV?" The room tilted slightly. I set my coffee down very carefully and crossed the room to where Dominic was holding her, and I took her face in both hands and looked at her with everything I had. Her eyes were the same dark brown as Caleb's, which was the cruelest possible design choice the universe had ever made, and I loved her so completely that the love had no edges. "Daddy is going through something hard right now," I said, "but you don't need to worry about any of it. That is a grown-up thing, and your only job is to eat breakfast and find out if Grandpa's cook will make those blueberry pancakes." Her face transformed instantly. "With the syrup in the little pitcher. Ask him, he can't say no to you." She was already wriggling to get down. Dominic set her on her feet, and she and Biscuit disappeared down the hallway in a small, thundering parade of joy that made my heart feel like it was breaking and healing simultaneously. I turned back to Dominic. "He wants me to come out publicly and deny this," I said. "If I do that, I become the disputed party. This stops being about his crimes and starts being about our fight. I will not give him that." I picked up my phone. "What I need you to do is find me the name of the doctor who signed my fake psychiatric file. Today." Dominic came back to the library at 2:17 in the afternoon with his tablet in one hand and an expression that told me everything before he said a single word. His jaw was set, his eyes were sharp with the focused anger of a man who had spent years tracking down people who had done terrible things and had never quite gotten used to finding them. "Got him," he said, setting the tablet on the table in front of me. "Dr. Raymond Holt, private psychiatric practice in Cambridge. The clinic is called Clearwater Mind and Wellness. Very tasteful website, very calming color palette. He issued a psychiatric evaluation under your name 8 weeks ago." He pointed to 2 lines of text on the screen. 2 sessions on record, September 9th and September 23rd. I looked at the dates. Something cold moved through me from the center outward, reaching all the way to my fingertips. "September 9th, I said. "I was at the New England Museum Conservation Symposium in Providence. I presented a paper on pigment degradation in 19th century oil paintings. There are photographs of me at the podium. I was there from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening." "I know," Dominic said, his voice tight. "I already pulled the conference records." "September 23rd. My voice was very flat now, the flatness of someone pressing down very hard on something that wants to rise. "You and I drove Dad to Logan Airport, his flight to London. We dropped him off at Terminal E at 11:15, then we had lunch at that terrible seafood place on the harbor because it was the only thing open and you complained about the clam chowder for the entire meal." Dominic let out a short, humorless sound that was not quite a laugh. "The chowder was genuinely bad, Briar." "I know it was." My hands pressed flat on the table. "I was not in Cambridge on September 23rd. I was sitting across a sticky table from you listening to you complain about chowder." I pulled the tablet closer and opened the full evaluation document. "So whatever Dr. Raymond Holt put in this file is something he invented entirely on his own, or that someone else invented for him." I started reading the symptom descriptions, and that was the moment everything became much, much worse. The document listed my alleged complaints in clinical measured language: severe and recurring memory lapses, episodes of emotional dysregulation, persistent fatigue and cognitive fog, difficulty maintaining focus during professional tasks, increasing social withdrawal and paranoid ideation. My hands started shaking. Not visibly at first, just a fine tremor beneath the surface, the kind that starts in the sternum and works outward. Because I recognized every single item on that list. Not from any psychiatric evaluation. I recognized them because I had experienced every single one of them over the past 3 weeks. And I had told myself each time that I was overworked, understimulated, spending too many hours in the conservation lab under artificial light. "Dom," I said, and my voice came out wrong, cracked straight down the middle. "These symptoms, these are what scopolamine does. These are the exact side effects of low-dose scopolamine administered continuously over multiple weeks. The memory lapses, the fatigue, the cognitive fog." I pushed back from the table so hard the chair scraped the floor, and I stood up because sitting still was suddenly completely impossible. My eyes were burning and my chest was heaving, and I pressed both hands over my mouth. He built the medical file before he started the dosing. Dom, he wrote down what the drug was going to do to me before he even started giving it to me. Like a project plan, like a... Stop. Dominic was on his feet and across the room, and his hands were on my shoulders, gripping hard the way you grip someone you are trying to keep from going somewhere very dark. "Briar, look at me. Look at me right now." I looked at him. His eyes were glassy, with something he was holding back by sheer force of character, and his jaw was trembling in a way I had never seen on my brother's face, not once in 33 years. "He planned this," I said, because I needed to say it out loud to make it real. "He sat down somewhere and he planned this like it was a business strategy. He chose the drug, he found the doctor, he scheduled the appointments that I was never at, and then he came home and cooked dinner and asked me about my day." A sound escaped me that I cannot fully describe, something between a sob and a laugh and a scream. "He asked me about my day, Dom, every single night." Dominic pulled me in and held me the way Arthur had held me at the front steps, with both arms, and no words, because words were the wrong shape for this. I pressed my face against his shoulder and cried for exactly 45 seconds, hard and ugly, and without any restraint at all, because I needed 45 seconds to let it be as terrible as it actually was. Then I stepped back. I wiped my face with both palms. I picked up the tablet. Silas needs this file, I said. Every page. And I want Dr. Raymond Holt added to every criminal complaint we file. My phone rang. Silas. Breyer, he said when I answered. The toxicology results are here. You need to see these right now. I was standing in the library doorway with the phone pressed against my ear so hard it hurt before Silas had even finished his first sentence. Come to the sitting room, he said. Dr. Yao is already here. I want her to walk you through the results herself. I was down the hallway before he hung up. The sitting room felt different than it had the night before. Smaller somehow. Or perhaps I was bigger, filled with something dense and airless that was pressing out against my ribs. Dr. Christine Yao was seated at the small table near the window with a printed report in front of her, and Silas was standing to her right, with his hands clasped behind his back in the posture of a man preparing to deliver a verdict. Arthur was already in the room. He was standing near the fireplace with his arms crossed and his face doing the thing it did when he was holding something very heavy, very still. Tell me, I said. Dr. Yao looked at me with the steady, compassionate directness of someone who had delivered difficult news before and had learned that the kindest version was also the most direct. The forensic hair strand analysis confirmed chronic exposure to scopolamine, she said. 3 centimeters of growth analyzed. The chemical signatures are consistent with continuous low-dose administration over a period of approximately 21 days. 21 days. I counted backward without meaning to. It was the kind of arithmetic that happens automatically, the brain pulling up a calendar and populating it with memories. 3 weeks ago, I had taken Ivy to her dance class and sat in the waiting room feeling so exhausted I had fallen asleep in the chair and the teacher had had to wake me. 3 weeks ago, I had forgotten a client meeting I had scheduled myself and had sent a frantic apology email that I could not fully reconstruct afterward. 3 weeks ago, I had stood in front of my own bathroom mirror and told my own reflection that I needed to take better care of myself, that the fog I was living inside was the result of overwork and nothing more. 21 days, I said out loud. My voice was completely level. The levelness of it was the most frightening thing in the room. The blood panel shows metabolite traces consistent with exposure within the last 48 hours. Dr. Yao continued. Meaning he did not stop. She paused. He was still dosing you the night you left. The tea. The last cup of tea he had carried up the stairs on a tray, with that warm and careful smile. The tea that was getting cold while I climbed down a bougainvillea trellis in cotton slippers with my daughter asleep against my chest. Arthur made a sound from across the room. It was a very short sound, barely a syllable, the kind of involuntary noise that escapes a person when something hits them somewhere that has no armor. He turned toward the fireplace and pressed one hand against the mantelpiece, and stayed like that for a moment, his shoulders rigid and his head slightly bowed, and I understood that he was doing the same calculation I was doing, populating his own calendar with the phone calls we had shared during those 3 weeks. The Sunday dinners, the times he had looked at me across a table and thought I seemed tired and assumed it was work. Dad, I said. Give me just a moment, he said without turning around. His voice was barely recognizable. I just need one moment. I gave him the moment. I looked at Dr. Yao. Ivy drank the same tea sometimes, I said. My heart was slamming so hard I could feel it in my temples, in my throat, in my hands. She would sit with me in the evenings and we would share the mug. I need you to test her, right now, please. Dr. Yao was already standing. I took a precautionary sample last night when I was here, she said. I had it prioritized as soon as you mentioned the tea this morning. The results came in with yours. She held my gaze. Ivy's panel is negative Breyer, completely clean. The sound I made was not dignified. It was loud and ragged and it tore out of me before I could shape it into anything, and I grabbed the back of the nearest chair with both hands and bent over it and let it come. My whole body was shaking, my knees were barely holding, and the relief was so enormous and so violent that it was almost indistinguishable from pain. She's okay, I managed. She's okay. She's completely okay, Dr. Yao confirmed, and her voice was gentler now. Arthur crossed the room. He did not say anything. He just put his hand on my back and kept it there solid and warm, and I breathed against the back of the chair until the shaking worked its way out of my system and left something else behind. Something harder. Something with edges. I straightened up, I wiped my face, I looked at Silas. I want the toxicology report certified and notarized, I said. Every page, and I want the charge list updated. I drew a breath that felt like pulling air through gravel. Caleb Thorne did not plan to poison me. He was actively poisoning me for 21 consecutive days. That is not conspiracy. That is not attempt. I picked up the report from the table and held it. Add attempted murder to the file, Silas. That is what this is. Silas wrote it down without hesitation. The pen moved across the legal pad with a sound like something being carved. There is one more thing, he said without looking up. The restraining order was granted 40 minutes ago. He cannot come within 500 feet of you or Ivy effective immediately. He set the pen down. And Breyer, 3 of his largest gallery clients sent termination notices this morning. The IP revocation is working. I looked at the report in my hand. 21 days. A grid of dates that would never mean the same thing again. Good, I said. Keep going. I had designed the smart home system for the Back Bay apartment 2 years before Caleb and I moved in together. It had been a professional habit as much as a personal one, the instinct of someone trained to think about preservation and protection, about what happens to valuable things when no one is watching. The hub was a standard off-the-shelf device, a sleek, matte cylinder that sat on the bookshelf in the living room and looked exactly what it claimed to be: a speaker. A convenience. A piece of tasteful technology that Caleb had never once looked at closely enough to notice the wide-angle lens built into its upper ring. I opened my laptop and logged into the system. I had not opened the feed since the night I left. I hadn't been ready to look at those rooms as something that had happened to me. That morning, for the first time, I was. The feed took 4 seconds to buffer, then it snapped into focus. Jessica Reynolds was sitting on my sofa. She was curled into the left corner of it, the corner I always sat in with her shoes off and her legs folded underneath her, in the casual proprietorial way of someone who had been using this space for a while and had stopped thinking of it as anyone else's. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater, and her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, and she was holding a mug in both hands, lifting it to her lips with the unhurried ease of a woman entirely at home. The mug was the wide ceramic one with the chip on the handle. My mug, the one I had kept for 6 years because I never got around to replacing it, the one I drank my morning coffee from every single day, the one I had carried from 3 different apartments and a graduate student housing unit and never thrown away. My throat closed so completely it was like swallowing a stone. Caleb walked out of the bedroom. He was wearing the gray pullover he always changed into after work, the one that had a small ink stain on the left cuff from a pen that had leaked in his jacket pocket 2 summers ago. He sat down on the sofa beside Jessica, and she leaned her head toward his shoulder without looking up, a movement so practiced and automatic that it had clearly happened hundreds of times before. In my living room, on my sofa, while I was somewhere else. She's completely gone quiet, Caleb said, rubbing his face with both hands. No response to my posts. No public statement? Nothing. That's worse than if she'd come out swinging, Jessica said. She pulled the mug away from her lips and set it on my coffee table without a coaster directly on the wood, and I felt a flash of something so disproportionately furious that it almost made me laugh. Of all the things to feel right now, silence means she's building something. Who's she got in her corner? Her brother, her father. Caleb's voice was tight with something that was trying very hard to sound like concern and landing closer to fear. Silas Montgomery. Jessica sat up straighter. Montgomery, the federal litigation guy? Yeah. Caleb. Her voice shifted into something sharper, the indulgent warmth stripped away. That's not good. Montgomery doesn't do divorces, he does takedowns. Caleb pressed his fingers against his eyes. I know that. Then we need to move faster on the narrative. Get someone from her old firm to go on record, a former colleague, a competitor, anyone who'll say she was always a little unstable, that the breakdown has been coming for years. She reached over and gripped his arm. You need to control what people believe about her before she gets the chance to show them anything real. And if she already has something real, Caleb's voice dropped lower and something in it made the hair on my arms rise. Not guilt, something closer to calculation running up against the edge of its own limits. Jessica let out a short, dismissive breath. What does she have? She ran out of the apartment in her slippers carrying a 5-year-old. She has her daddy's lawyers and a grudge. She picked up my mug again and took a long, comfortable sip. She doesn't have anything we can't manage. My hand was shaking so hard I had to use my other hand to steady it over the trackpad. The shake was not grief. It was not even anger, not exactly. It was the particular physical response to watching someone underestimate you with such absolute confidence that it becomes almost clarifying. She did not know about Gemtrace. She did not know about the toxicology report. She did not know about Leo, or about Silas, or about the 37 client termination notices that were going to hit Caleb's inbox when he opened his corporate email Monday morning. She did not know that every single word she was saying into that living room was being recorded at forensic quality on a triple encrypted server in this library. She thought I had run away. She had no idea I had come home. I pressed record on the server interface and watched the green indicator light up. Then I turned to Dominic, who had been standing behind me reading the feed over my shoulder, and who had gone so rigidly still that he had stopped breathing. "Dom," I said, my voice steady as a level surface. "I need you to find me the best art replica studio in Boston. Someone who can produce 5 paintings in 72 hours and make them indistinguishable from the originals to any buyer who isn't looking for the frames." Dominic blinked. He looked from me to the screen where Jessica was reaching over to pick up Ivy's small stuffed rabbit from the end of the sofa and drop it carelessly onto the floor to make more room for herself. Something moved through his face that was raw and unguarded and entirely unprintable. "I'll have a name in an hour," he said. The art studio Dominic found was in Somerville, run by a woman named Petra Moss, who had spent 15 years producing museum-quality replicas for insurance documentation and private collectors. When Dominic showed me her portfolio, I looked at the reproductions of 3 separate 17th-century oil paintings and felt the familiar involuntary pull of professional recognition. The brushwork was extraordinary. The aging of the paint surfaces was done with the kind of patience and expertise that took years to develop. "Tell her I need 5 pieces by Thursday," I said. "I'll send her the originals tonight for reference scanning. I want the frames to look worn, not distressed artificially, actually worn." I paused. She'll know what I mean. While Dominic made the call, I walked to the east wing of the estate where the climate-controlled storage room held the collection my mother had left me. 14 paintings and 3 bronze sculptures gathered over 30 years by a woman with a quiet, fierce eye for beauty and an absolute refusal to let anyone tell her what was worth keeping. I stood in the doorway of the storage room and looked at them in the low, careful lighting, and the grief that moved through me was a different shape than the grief of the last 2 days. Softer at the edges. Older. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said out loud to no one. "I'll bring them back, I promise." Then I took out my phone. The Instagram account I used for personal posts had fewer than 200 followers. Colleagues, a handful of close friends, my father, my brother, and Caleb, who had asked to be added 3 years ago with a smile that I had thought was endearing, this small desire to be connected to the quieter parts of my life. I had added him without hesitation. I found a photograph on my phone of the storage room doorway taken the previous summer when I had come to rotate the pieces for humidity management. I cropped it carefully, keeping the edge of one gilt frame visible, warm light falling across the title plaque. Then I typed the caption, "Going through some of the pieces Mom left behind. Some of them have been in storage so long I almost forgot how beautiful they are. Thinking it might finally be time to have the collection properly appraised. Some of these could be significant." I set the account to close friends. I hit post. Then I set my phone on the table and did not look at it for an hour, because if I looked at it, I would feel what I was actually doing, which was using the most precious thing my mother left me as the teeth of a trap for the man who had been slowly poisoning me for 3 weeks. Dominic came in carrying his own phone. His expression had the particular quality of someone delivering two pieces of news simultaneously and trying to determine which one to lead with. "The Somerville studio says yes," he said. "And Breyer, the IP termination numbers just came in from Leo. 3 clients this morning: the Boston Institute, Harborview Auction House, and Meridian Private Banking." He turned the phone so I could see the revenue breakdown. Together, those 3 accounts represent 71% of Caleb's annual recurring revenue. I looked at the number. "He'll be desperate by tonight," I said. "He's already desperate," Dominic said, and he pulled up the camera feed on his tablet. The living room of the Back Bay apartment looked different in the afternoon light. Caleb was pacing, which I had never seen him do, because Caleb was a man who had always been very careful about projecting stillness. Stillness read as confidence. Pacing was something else entirely. Jessica was sitting upright now, both feet on the floor, watching him with the sharp attention of someone who has just realized the situation is more serious than she had been told. 3 clients in one morning," Caleb was saying, his voice tight and fast. "This is not a coincidence. Someone is doing this intentionally." "It's Breyer," Jessica said flatly. "It has to be. She doesn't have the access." But his voice wavered on the word access in a way that told me he was not entirely sure of that. Which meant somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew about Gemtrace. He had always known. "Caleb." Jessica stood up and caught his arm to stop the pacing. "You need to breathe. We need to focus on what we can still control." His phone buzzed on the coffee table. He picked it up. He read whatever was on the screen, and I watched his face change through 3 distinct expressions in approximately 4 seconds. Confusion. Recognition. Then something that looked to my experienced eye very much like hunger. "Breyer posted something," he said slowly. Jessica moved to look at the screen. Her eyes went wide. 5 pieces. Appraised at significant value. She looked up at him. "How significant is significant?" "Her mother's collection." Caleb said it quietly as if he were doing the arithmetic in his head. "Last time it was valued, the whole lot came in just over 5 million. The hunger in his face was no longer subtle. It had moved fully to the surface. Jessica's hand tightened on his arm. "Caleb," she breathed. 5 million clears everything. The debt, the loan, everything. We could disappear." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the phone. "I need to find out where she's storing them." I was watching all of this from the library, with my hands folded on the table in front of me and my breathing completely even. The bait was in the water. The line was taut. I could feel the exact moment the hook had caught. "Dom," I said, "call Henderson at the storage facility. Tell him we need the replica manifest ready by tomorrow morning." Petra Moss delivered the 5 replicas on Wednesday afternoon, wrapped in archival tissue and packed in acid-free crates with the kind of care that told me she understood exactly what she was handling, even if she did not know why. I met her at the loading dock of the estate myself, and when I opened the first crate and lifted the tissue back, the painting underneath stopped my breath for a full 3 seconds. It was my mother's favorite, a small impressionist oil of a harbor, at dusk, blues and golds layered over each other in the particular way that took decades to learn the kind of painting that rewarded you for looking slowly. Petra's replica was so close to the original that the professional part of my brain automatically began cataloging the microscopic differences the way it always did, looking for the tells that separated genuine from reproduction. It took me longer than it should have. "This is extraordinary work," I said. Petra was a small woman in her 50s with paint permanently embedded under her fingernails and the matter-of-fact manner of someone who had long since stopped needing compliments. "The frames were the challenge," she said. "Getting the wear pattern right on the gilding took most of Tuesday night, but I think they'll hold." "They'll hold," I said, "thank you." After she left, I carried each replica down to the estate's secondary storage room and opened my kit. The nano sentinel chips were the size of a grain of rice, encased in a ceramic housing that registered on standard X-ray scanners as a structural nail in the frame. I had developed the system during a Smithsonian security grant 3 years earlier, designed originally to protect indigenous cultural artifacts from trafficking networks. The chips used a combination of GPS positioning, light-level sensing, and motion signature to detect when an object had been removed from an approved location and entered an unauthorized transaction environment. Once triggered, they broadcast a continuous signal with the object's real-time coordinates and a linked case identifier. I seeded each chip into the prepared channel in each frame's inner edge, with the same focused precision I used for the most delicate restoration work, a jeweler's loop over one eye, and a pair of stabilization forceps in my right hand. My breathing was slow and even. My hands were perfectly still. Arthur appeared in the doorway while I was working on the fourth frame. He watched for a moment without speaking, which with Arthur was not absence but attention. Then he said, "Your grandfather designed the original Sentinel system. Did I ever tell you that?" "You told me," I said without looking up from the chip. "When I was 12, you showed me the schematics." "He would have liked this," Arthur said quietly. There was something in his voice that was both proud and heartbroken in equal measure, and I pressed my lips together and kept working. The previous afternoon, I had driven to the FBI Boston field office and met with Special Agent Dana Reeves of the Art Crime Team. She was 42 precise and had the particular quality of someone who had seen too many cases where the evidence arrived too late. When I laid out the chip technology and the case file on the table between us, she read every page without interrupting and then looked up at me. "You're telling me you want to use yourself as the evidence collection mechanism," she said. "I'm telling you I already am," I said. "I need you to have a warrant ready and a unit on standby. The chips will give you a confirmed location, a confirmed suspect, and documented transfer of ownership in real time. All you need to do is be ready to move." She had studied me for a moment, the way people do when they are trying to determine whether they are looking at someone very clever or someone very reckless. Then she said serial numbers. I slid the list across the table. She picked up her pen. The fake manifest Henderson prepared listed the correct painting names and values, but directed to false locker numbers on the facility's lower level, a section currently empty. The real replicas sat in an upper unit in my name. The genuine originals had already been moved to the estate's underground vault, where they would remain until this was entirely over. Caleb arrived at the facility on Thursday morning at 9:47. Henderson called me the moment the visitor log registered his name. "He came in claiming to be your representative," Henderson said, his voice low and careful. "I told him I couldn't grant access without your authorization, but that I could show him the public manifest as a courtesy. He was here for 11 minutes. He photographed every page." "Good," I said. "Did he seem confident?" A pause. "He seemed like a man who thinks he's about to solve all of his problems." I thanked Henderson and hung up. Dominic and I spent the next 36 hours in the library watching the camera feeds in shifts, 2 hours on and 2 hours resting, the way you watch a patient in a critical window. On Friday morning at 7:38, the facility's external camera picked up a dark SUV pulling into the rear access lane. Dominic was the one watching. He came to the door of the library and knocked twice, which was our signal. I was out of the chair before he said a word. On the monitor, a man in dark clothing climbed out of the SUV carrying a large canvas duffel bag over one shoulder. He moved quickly and without hesitation, the walk of someone who had rehearsed this. He stopped at the rear entrance and raised his right hand toward the biometric panel. The hand was wearing a thin silicone overlay. My thumbprint captured from a gel pad months ago under the pretense of calibrating my phone screen. Protector pressed against the reader. The door unlocked. "Agent Reeves," I said into my phone. "He's going in." He was inside for 7 minutes and 23 seconds. I know because I counted every one of them. The facility's interior cameras showed him moving through the lower level with the focused efficiency of someone who had memorized the floor plan, which he had. He had studied the fake manifest for 3 days, cross-referenced the locker numbers, and mapped a route that would let him load and exit through the rear fire door without passing the main desk. He had done his homework. For a man who had never once opened a technical manual in our 4 years of marriage, Caleb Thorne could be extraordinarily thorough when the prize was large enough. I watched him pop the locks on 3 display units with a tool that suggested he had either purchased it specifically for this purpose or knew someone who had. I watched him wrap each painting with the microfiber cloths he had brought in the duffel bag, working quickly, but not carelessly, treating the pieces with the practiced reverence of a man who had spent years around valuable art. The irony of that was not lost on me. He handled my mother's replicas more gently than he had ever handled my mother's daughter. 7 minutes and 23 seconds. He zipped the duffel, shouldered it, pushed through the fire door, and was back in the SUV. "He's moving," Dominic said from his position at the window of the estate library, where we had set up the relay feeds on 3 separate monitors. His voice was completely flat in the way it got when he was operating on pure professional focus and had locked everything personal behind a door for later. Heading south toward the waterfront. I already had my phone in my hand. "Agent Reeves? He's left the facility. Dark SUV heading south on Tremont." "We have him," she said. Her voice was crisp and unhurried. "Our unit has been on him since he pulled into the access lane. We'll let him complete the transaction. We need the handoff documented." "Understood," I said. "The chips will confirm the moment the pieces change hands." I set the phone down and opened the GPS tracking interface on my laptop. 5 green dots sat in a cluster at the facility's coordinates, moving now, tracking south through the city in real time. I had looked at tracking interfaces for 11 years. The Nano Sentinel display was one I had built myself, and watching it work on these specific coordinates for this specific purpose produced a feeling I could not name precisely. It was not satisfaction yet. It was the feeling just before satisfaction, the held breath before the exhale. Dominic pulled up the second feed. The underground warehouse at the harbor had been a dealership for off-book, high-value goods for years, operating in the gap between the auction houses and the black market, with just enough plausible legitimacy to avoid sustained attention. Marcus Webb had been its primary broker for the last decade. I knew of him the way anyone in the authentication business knew of the people who moved things that should not be moved by reputation, by the traces left behind in provenance records that suddenly went cold. The warehouse camera feed was clear and steady because it ran on an Aurora cybernetic security system that had been installed 4 years ago and whose backdoor administrator credentials had never been changed from the default I had set during the installation walkthrough. Marcus Webb was already inside when Caleb arrived. He was a broad man in his 60s with the permanent expression of someone pricing everything they looked at. He watched Caleb set the duffel bag on the long velvet table with the contained impatience of a man whose time was accounted for in significant increments. "Let me see them," he said. Caleb unzipped the bag and laid out the first painting. Marcus produced a jeweler's loupe from his breast pocket and leaned over the surface, moving the loupe slowly across the paint layers. His expression did not change, but his posture shifted slightly forward, which was a tell I recognized from my own professional habit of leaning toward things that were worth something. 4.2, Marcus said, "for all 5. These are worth 5 million at retail," Caleb said. His voice was tight but controlled. "I want 3.8. You want a buyer who doesn't ask questions, that's what you want." Marcus straightened and looked at him. 3.5. That is my final number. Caleb's jaw tightened. I watched it happen on the monitor from 40 blocks away and felt something very cold move through my chest. Not grief, not rage, just the clean, specific sensation of watching a machine execute exactly as designed. 3.5, Caleb said. They reached across the velvet table and shook hands. On my laptop screen, all 5 green dots turned crimson simultaneously. The system alert box opened in the corner. Nano Sentinel Tier 1 alert. Unauthorized transfer event confirmed. Location 14 Harbor Industrial Way, Boston. Suspect biometric confirmed. Registered owner Briar Elaine Vance. FBI Art Crime Team and Boston PD Financial Crimes Unit notified. Case ID BOSFC 20241018. My phone rang before I had finished reading it. "We're going in," Agent Reeves said. And then I could hear, even through the phone's small speaker, the sound of her unit moving. Dominic let out a long, shaking breath from somewhere behind me. "Briar," he said, and his voice was raw around the edges, with something he had been holding in since the night I climbed down a bougainvillea trellis in cotton slippers. "He's done." I looked at the 5 red dots pulsing on my screen, each one a painting my mother had chosen. Each one now broadcasting Caleb Thorne's location to federal law enforcement with the precise, faithful accuracy of something built to protect what mattered. "Yes," I said, "he is." The call came at 3:52 in the afternoon. Dominic had gone to the kitchen to get coffee and came back carrying 2 mugs and his phone, and wearing an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not shock, exactly. More like the face of someone who has been running at full speed and has suddenly completely stopped. "They got him," he said. "Caleb and Marcus Webb, both in custody. They recovered all 5 pieces and froze the wire transfer before it cleared escrow." He set one of the mugs in front of me very carefully, as though it required his full attention. "It's done, Briar." I looked at the mug. I looked at my hands on the table. I had expected this moment to feel like something enormous and specific, like the first breath after a long time underwater. What it actually felt like was quieter than that and heavier. More like setting down a weight you had been carrying so long that your body had built itself around it. And now that it was gone, you had to relearn the shape of your own arms. "What about Jessica?" I asked. "She wasn't at the warehouse, but Agent Reeves says they dumped Caleb's phone on site. The encrypted chat history between him and Jessica goes back 14 months. Dominic sat down across from me. "They're serving her with an arrest warrant tonight." Arthur came into the library at that moment, moving with the particular careful quietness of someone who has been listening from the doorway and has decided to stop pretending otherwise. He looked at me across the room and did not say anything for a moment. His eyes were very bright. Then he crossed to where I was sitting, put both of his large, warm hands on my face, the way he had when I was small, and pressed his lips to the top of my head. "It's over," he said in a voice that barely held together. "It's not over yet," I said, but I turned my face into his hand for exactly 3 seconds before I straightened back up because I needed those 3 seconds and I had earned them. Silas arrived at the estate 40 minutes later with a manila folder so thick it required a rubber band around it. He dropped it onto the library table and sat down across from me and Dominic, with the expression of a man delivering a bill that is much larger than the client had anticipated. "The forensic accountants finished their trace this afternoon," he said. "I want to walk you through what they found before it gets filed because some of it is going to require a moment." "Walk me through it," I said. Silas opened the folder. "Between January of last year and August of this year, Caldwell Gallery's operating accounts initiated 23 irregular wire transfers, amounts ranging from $40,000 to $110,000, total value $1.5 million. He turned a page. Every transfer went to a single receiving account registered to an LLC called JR Consulting. I recognized the initials the same instant Dominic did. I heard him pull in a sharp breath across the table. "JR," I said, "Jessica Reynolds." "Jessica Ann Reynolds," Silas confirmed. "Sole registered proprietor. The LLC was formed 18 months ago in Delaware. It has no website, no business filings, no clients, no activity of any kind beyond receiving these transfers." He set down the page and looked at me over the rims of his glasses. $1.5 million, Briar, paid to his mistress through a shell company drawn from the operating revenues of the gallery. The gallery that ran on GemTrace, the technology I had built, the revenues it generated flowing through Caleb's accounts, and then directly into Jessica Reynolds's pocket, through a door he had constructed specifically for that purpose. My chest was doing something complicated that I could not fully name. It was not grief and it was not rage. It was the specific feeling of understanding very clearly, and all at once the full scale of a thing. Like standing back from a painting you have been restoring piece by piece and finally seeing the complete image. "Where did the money go?" I asked. "After it went to JR Consulting." Silas turned another page. "Most of it was consolidated and used to purchase real estate. A penthouse unit in a Beacon Hill building, 4,000 square feet. Purchase price $1.2 million, paid entirely in cash. Title registered jointly to Caleb Thorne and Jessica Reynolds." He paused. "The title transfer was recorded in March of this year." March. 8 months ago. While I was working 16-hour days in the conservation lab, finishing a major restoration project for a museum in New York, calling home every evening, and hearing Caleb's voice tell me he was proud of me and that dinner would be ready when I got back. While I was doing that, he was signing the title to a penthouse for his girlfriend. A sound came out of me that I had not planned. Not a sob and not a laugh. something shorter and sharper, like something giving way under pressure. Dominic reached across the table and put his hand over mine and squeezed so hard it hurt, and I was grateful for the hurt, because it gave me something concrete to push back against. "How many charges does this add?" I asked. My voice was steady. I made it be steady through nothing but will. "Corporate embezzlement," Silas said, counting on his fingers with the measured calm of a man reciting a list he has memorized. "Wire fraud, money laundering because of the shell company structure. Those layer on top of what we already have. The DA is looking at a RICO framework briar. This is not a domestic dispute anymore. This is organized financial crime." "Good," I said. "File all of it. Every charge, every page, everything Leo documented, everything Agent Reeves has. I want the entire picture in front of the district attorney by Monday morning." "Already being prepared?" Silas said. My phone buzzed on the table. I looked at the screen. Mrs. Thorne. I watched it ring. 4 buzzes. 5. 6. The name sitting there on the screen like an answer to a question no one had asked. The woman who had called me her golden daughter-in-law at every family gathering for 4 years. The woman who had rinsed Caleb's coffee cup and folded his shirts and told him in a low, decisive voice to be firm with the doctor about the dosage. I watched her name on the screen and I felt absolutely nothing for her that resembled softness. The phone stopped ringing. I set it face down on the table. "What time does the district attorney's office open tomorrow?" I asked. 8:30, Silas said. "Then I want everything on their desk by 8:15, I said, not a single page missing." The security system chimed at 9:14 the following morning. I was in the library with a cup of coffee that had gone cold beside me, going through the final version of the criminal complaint filing with Silas, when the estate's head of security, a quiet former state trooper named Garrett, knocked once on the doorframe. "Mrs. Thorne is at the front gate," he said. "She came on foot, no vehicle. She's been standing there for approximately 20 minutes. I looked up from the document in front of me. Silas raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Is she alone?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am." I thought about it for exactly 5 seconds. Then I said, "Let her in. Bring her to the sitting room. And Garrett, give me 2 minutes before you show her in." He nodded and withdrew. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and turned on the voice memo app on my phone, then slid it back into my pocket with the microphone facing out. Silas watched me do this, and the corner of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to approval. "I'll be in the East Study if you need me," he said, gathering his papers. "Stay close," I said. The woman who walked into the sitting room 2 minutes later was not the Mrs. Thorne I had known for 4 years. That woman had been sharp-edged and carefully dressed, a woman who controlled rooms through the quality of her attention and the precision of her opinions. The woman Garrett showed in had been crying for what looked like the better part of a day and a night. Her eyes were swollen, nearly shut. Her hair was imprecisely pinned, and she was wearing a coat that she had clearly grabbed without looking, because the buttons were fastened one hole off, leaving the hem uneven. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together in front of her to keep them still. She saw me standing near the window and her face crumpled completely. "Briar," she said. Her voice was wrecked, completely hollowed out. "Please. I know I have no right to be here. I know that, but I had nowhere else to go." "Sit down, Eleanor," I said. I used her first name deliberately, without the formality of Mrs. Thorne, because I needed her to understand that the dynamic she had operated under for 4 years no longer existed. "There's water on the table." She sat. She did not take the water. She pressed both hands flat on her knees and looked at me with the raw, red-rimmed eyes of a woman who had looked at something terrible during the night and had not been able to look away from it. "He's my son," she said. "I know what he did. I know all of it now, the doctor, the paintings, the money, all of it. And I know that you have every right to want to see him destroyed." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her lips together until it passed. "But I'm asking you, woman-to-woman mother, to you have Ivy. You know what it is to love a child so completely that it overrides everything else. I'm asking you to have some mercy." "Tell me what you knew," I said. She flinched. "Briar. Eleanor." I kept my voice level and my face completely neutral. "You drove to this house on foot. You've been standing at the gate for 20 minutes. If you came here to ask me something, then you need to tell me the truth." All of it. What did you know and when did you know it? She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the pretense was gone. What was left was something exhausted and ashamed and very old. He told me about the financial problems last spring, she said. I knew about the debt. I knew about Jessica. I actually encouraged Jessica because she was easier. She didn't have the family behind her. I thought Caleb needed someone who would defer to him more than you did. She stopped, and the shame on her face deepened visibly. That was wrong. I understand now that it was wrong. Keep going, I said. He told me about his plan in August. Her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Not all of it. He said he was going to get you help, that you had been struggling, and that you needed to be somewhere safe for a while, somewhere you could rest. He said there was a doctor who could document it properly. She looked down at her hands. I asked him if you would be comfortable. I asked if the place was a good one, and he said yes, and I believed him because I wanted to believe him. She was crying again now, quietly, the tears running down her face, without any of the dramatic excess of someone performing grief. This was the real thing. This was a woman sitting in the ruins of what she had told herself, and understanding perhaps for the first time the distance between what she had chosen to believe and what had actually been happening. He mentioned the dosage once, she said, and there it was, the sentence that changed everything. He said he needed to calibrate it carefully, that it had to be gradual so it would look natural. I told him to be careful. I told him not to leave marks. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. I thought it was a sedative, something mild. I didn't understand that he was... She stopped, swallowed. I didn't let myself understand. I didn't let myself understand. 8 words that told me everything about the distance between knowing and choosing to know. Eleanor, I said carefully, I need you to understand something. What you just told me, that you knew about a dosage, that you told him to be careful, that you knew about the plan to have me committed, that is not ignorance. That is participation. I watched her face go white. A lawyer is going to need to speak with you. Not Silas, a separate attorney. Someone who represents your interests and not mine. You need to call one today. She stared at me, her mouth opened and closed. Are you telling me I'm going to be charged? I'm telling you to get a lawyer, I said. Today. She looked as though the chair beneath her had dissolved. She sat very still for a long moment, and then she began to cry again, differently this time, with a low, continuous sound. That was the sound of someone realizing there is no version of this story where they come out undamaged. My phone rang. Silas. Briar, he said when I stepped into the hallway. I just got a call from Caleb's defense attorney. Caleb is asking to see you before the trial. He wants a private meeting. I looked back through the sitting room doorway at Mrs. Thorne, who was sitting exactly where I had left her, crying into her clasped hands. Then I looked at the phone. Set it up, I said. Official visitation. Both legal teams present. Full recording. And Silas, I want the toxicology report in my hand when I walk into that room. The conference room at the Suffolk County House of Corrections smelled like industrial cleaner and recycled air. The walls were cinder block painted the particular shade of gray that institutions use when they want a color that will not require any emotional response from the people inside. The table was metal bolted to the floor. The chairs were plastic bolted to nothing, and I could feel the slight wobble in mine when I settled into it. Silas sat to my right. Caleb's defense attorney, a man named Prater, who had the haggard look of someone recently handed a case he had not wanted, sat across from me. Between us, the table stretched like a distance that was not going to close. The door on the far side opened, and a corrections officer escorted Caleb in. He had lost weight. His face was thinner, the angles sharper, and the stubble on his jaw was uneven in the way it becomes when a man stops paying careful attention to himself. He was wearing the standard issue clothing of the facility. He looked nothing like the man who had carried a tray of honey tea down a hallway 8 days ago, and he looked exactly like him because the bones underneath were identical, and it was the bones I had learned to know. Mrs. Thorne was already seated in a chair against the wall. She had come at Prater's request, presumably to demonstrate family support. She sat very still with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the table in front of her, and she did not look at me. Caleb sat down. He looked at me for a long moment, and his eyes were red-rimmed in the way of someone who had either been crying or had not slept, or both. He pressed both hands flat on the table and drew a slow, visible breath as though he were steeling himself for something he had rehearsed. "Briar," he said, "I know you don't want to hear anything I have to say, but I need to say it anyway. I need you to know that I understand what I did, what I planned to do, and I am more sorry than I have ever been for anything in my entire life." "Tell me," I said. He blinked. He had expected, I think, to speak for longer before I responded. The debt was drowning me. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think. And Jessica kept telling me there was a way out, that it was simple, that if she manipulated me, Briar. I know that sounds like I'm deflecting, but she pushed me into every step of this. The doctor, the plan, all of it. "What about the drug?" I said. He met my eyes. There was something in his gaze that was working very hard to look like sincerity. "I bought it, I won't lie about that, but I never used it. I swear to God, I never actually went through with it. I put it in the drawer, and I looked at it every day, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't hurt you like that." His voice cracked on the last sentence in a way that was technically perfect. "I want the DA to know that. I want that on record. I made a terrible plan and I went too far, but I never actually poisoned my wife." He looked directly at me when he finished. His eyes were filled with tears that had not yet fallen, balanced there with the precision of a man who had calculated exactly how much emotion was persuasive without being excessive. I reached into my bags. I took out the toxicology report folded to the page I wanted. I smoothed it flat on the metal table with both hands. Then I turned it so that it faced him and pushed it across. "Line 7, I said, page 3. He looked down. His attorney leaned in beside him. The line read, "Forensic hair strand analysis confirms chronic scopolamine exposure. Sample length indicates continuous administration over a period consistent with 21 days. Blood metabolite levels indicate exposure within 48 hours of sample collection." The silence in the room was not the comfortable kind. It was the kind that has weight and temperature. 21 days, I said. 3 consecutive weeks. The blood panel confirms you were still dosing me the night I left. I watched his face as I said it. I watched the tears that had been so carefully balanced in his eyes lose their precision and spill not from grief, but from the sudden absence of any remaining option. "You told me just now that you hesitated, that you couldn't bring yourself to do it." I picked the report back up and folded it. "You didn't hesitate, Caleb. You had already been doing it for 3 weeks, every cup of tea, every morning." His voice had stopped working correctly. "That's not the test, must have." "The test was conducted by a certified forensic toxicologist under court-admissible protocol," Silas said from beside me, his voice carrying the unhurried authority of a man who has never once needed to raise it. "Chain of custody is fully documented. It will stand up to any challenge." Caleb's attorney was already writing something on his legal pad, fast with the tight penmanship of someone revising strategy in real time. Caleb himself had stopped talking. The performance he had prepared had required a particular stage set, a particular version of reality in which the drug had stayed in the drawer, and that stage set had just been dismantled in front of him with a single piece of paper. From the chair against the wall, Mrs. Thorne made a sound. It was very small and very final, like something structural giving way. She had raised her hand at some point during the conversation and placed it on Caleb's shoulder, and now I watched her take it back. Slowly, without drama, she simply withdrew her hand from her son's shoulder, folded it into her lap, and looked at the floor. Caleb saw it happen. I watched him watch it happen. I stood up. I gathered the report back into my bag and clipped it shut and pushed my chair in with both hands. I looked at Caleb one last time across the metal table. "I hope the district attorney enjoys reading this as much as I did," I said. Then I walked to the door and did not look back. It was raining the morning the trial began. Not the dramatic kind of rain that announces itself, but the steady gray, utterly indifferent Boston November rain that makes the whole city look like it has been rinsed of color. I stood on the steps of the John Joseph Moakley United States Courthouse for exactly 30 seconds before going in, not because I needed the moment, but because I wanted to feel the cold on my face, wanted to arrive inside the building having chosen to be there rather than simply ending up there. I wore a charcoal suit that I had owned for 5 years, plain and well cut. My hair was pulled back at the nape of my neck. I wore no rings, no earrings, no necklace. The absence of the copper piece at my throat had stopped feeling like nakedness sometime in the past 2 weeks. What it felt like now was a decision. I did not need to be tracked to know where I was. I knew exactly where I was. The public gallery was full. The case had attracted the particular quality of media attention reserved for stories that contained every element the public required for sustained interest: wealth, betrayal, pharmaceutical crime, and stolen art. 3 television crews were stationed outside when I arrived. I walked past all of them without changing my pace or my expression, and Dominic, who was a half step behind me on my left, was large enough and looked formidable enough that no one tried to put a microphone in my face. Arthur was already inside, seated in the front row of the gallery behind the prosecution table. When I walked in and he saw me, he pressed his lips together and gave one small, tight nod, and that was everything. That was the entire language of the moment. I sat down beside Silas at the prosecution table and folded my hands in front of me and looked straight ahead. Caleb was brought in 5 minutes later. He had been permitted to wear civilian clothes for the trial, and someone had brought him a dark suit that fit well, though he had lost enough weight that the shoulders sat slightly wide. He looked objectively like the man I had married. The posture was the same. The careful, measured way he held himself was the same. Only his eyes had changed, and they had changed in a way I could see from across the room, flatter, the particular flatness of someone who had run out of options and was now waiting to find out how large the consequence was. The DA, a compact woman in her 40s named Sandra Okafor, who spoke with the meticulous precision of someone who had never once lost a case she considered important, rose and read the charges with the unhurried confidence of someone presenting a document she had total faith in. 7 counts: attempted murder by poisoning, aggravated assault, medical fraud and forgery for the fabricated psychiatric evaluation, unlawful possession and administration of a controlled substance, corporate wire fraud, money laundering through a shell company, grand larceny in the first degree for the stolen artwork. Each count landed in the courtroom the way stones land in still water. I felt them as physical things, one after another, the accumulated weight of what a man had planned to do to the woman he had married and to the daughter who called him daddy. Caleb's defense attorney, Prater, tried. He had constructed an argument around extreme financial distress and diminished capacity. The narrative of a man crushed by debt who had made catastrophically wrong decisions under psychological duress. He was a competent lawyer, delivering an impossible argument, and the jury watched him with the polite, unpersuaded attention of people who have already made up their minds and are waiting for the formality to conclude. Sandra Okafor dismantled it in cross-examination with 3 questions. She established that the plan had required at minimum 90 days of coordinated effort across multiple co-conspirators and included the corruption of a licensed physician, the strategic theft of a fingerprint, and the preparation of a shell corporation. "Does that," she asked Prater directly during closing arguments, "sound like the impulsive behavior of a man whose judgment was impaired by stress? Or does it sound like the deliberate, sustained, methodical conduct of someone who knew exactly what they were doing at every step?" Prater had no good answer for that. He sat down. Jessica Reynolds was the last witness called before the jury retired. She had accepted a plea agreement in exchange for full cooperation, and she had dressed for the occasion in a way that suggested she understood the optics: a plain blouse and no makeup, the presentation of someone who had stripped away everything performative. She sat in the witness stand with her hands folded on the railing in front of her and answered Sandra Okafor's questions in a flat, steady voice that never once broke. "Miss Reynolds," Sandra said, "in your own words, what was the purpose of the plan as Caleb Thorne described it to you?" Jessica looked at the jury rather than the courtroom. "He said once she was out of the picture permanently, all the money would clear to us. He said we would buy a boat and move to Miami." She paused. He said it like it was a vacation plan. The murmur that ran through the gallery was not subtle. The judge gavelled once. In the row behind me, I heard Arthur draw a single sharp breath and release it slowly. I did not look at Caleb during Jessica's testimony. I looked at the jury. I watched 12 faces process what they were hearing. Watched the expressions move through discomfort and comprehension and something harder and more conclusive. And I thought about the girl who had stood on the steps of an art museum 3 years ago and believed that a man who could talk about a painting for 20 minutes without losing the thread of it was someone worth trusting. The jury retired at 11:47 in the morning and returned at 2:31 in the afternoon. The foreperson was a tall woman in her 60s who read the verdict with the steady gravity of someone who had sat with a decision of this weight and had made it carefully. On all 7 counts, guilty. The sentencing hearing had been expedited at the prosecution's motion 3 weeks prior, citing the completeness of evidence already on record and the defendant's documented flight risk. It followed the verdict that afternoon with the compressed, inevitable quality of something that had already been decided. Caleb Thorne was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole and ordered to pay $3,200,000 in restitution. Jessica Reynolds received 7 years. Dr. Raymond Holt was stripped of his medical license and sentenced to 3 years. The Beacon Hill penthouse was to be seized under federal asset forfeiture law. Caldwell Gallery was referred to the bankruptcy court for Chapter 7 liquidation. When the judge read the 18 years, Caleb made a sound. It was very small, and it came out before he could stop it, a single bitten-off syllable that held within it the entire collapse of everything he had planned and built and lied about and stolen. He did not look at me. He looked at the gallery, at the row where his mother sat, and the expression on his face was something I will not try to describe completely, because some things do not translate cleanly into language. He looked like a man who had finally fully understood what he had done and who could not go back. Mrs. Thorne was sitting in the last row on the far left, exactly where she had sat at the visitation meeting. She was looking at her lap. She did not look up when the sentence was read. She did not look up at all. The bailiff crossed the courtroom and fastened handcuffs over Caleb's wrists. The sound of the mechanism locking was clean and metallic in the sudden quiet of the room. They led him out the side door. He passed within 4 feet of where I was sitting, close enough that I could have reached out. His head was down, his pace steady, and then for exactly 1 fraction of a second, his step stuttered. A single beat of hesitation so small that only someone who knew how he walked could have detected it. Then he continued, and the heavy door opened and he was gone. I sat for a moment after the room began to move around me, after the noise of the gallery and the lawyers and the journalists resumed. I sat and I said goodbye to something. Not to Caleb. That goodbye had happened the night I stepped off that iron trellis into the wet November grass and left a marriage behind me. What I was saying goodbye to now was the version of myself who had needed that marriage to feel safe. The woman who had measured love in cups of tea and small repeated kindnesses and had not thought to look at what was in the cup. She was gone. I knew it the way I knew when a restoration was truly finished, not with fanfare, but with the quiet certainty of someone looking at a completed thing and recognizing it. I stood up, gathered my bag, and walked toward the door. Arthur and Dominic were waiting on the courthouse steps in the rain. Dominic had his collar turned up against the wet, and his hands in his pockets, and when he saw me come through the door, he crossed to me in 3 steps and wrapped both arms around me so hard I felt my spine pop, and he said absolutely nothing, because there was nothing that needed to be said. Arthur stood a step back and watched us with his hands at his sides and his eyes very bright and his jaw working slightly. When Dominic let go, Arthur stepped forward and took my face in his hands and looked at me for a long moment, the way he had when I was very young and had come home from something difficult. "It's done," he said. "It's done," I agreed. The rain came down on all 3 of us, unhurried and indifferent and completely unimpressed, the way Boston rain always is, and I turned my face up into it for just a second and let it hit me cold and clean and absolutely real. Then we walked down the steps together. 14 days after the sentencing, I drove myself to the Boston Police Evidence Lockup on Tremont Street. No Dominic, no Arthur, no Silas. Just me and the parking meter and a cold December morning that smelled like wood smoke and the particular metallic quality of air before snow. The officer at the desk was a young man with a patient face who found the evidence bag within 4 minutes and slid it across the counter with a release form. I signed it, broke the red evidence tape, and tipped the contents into my palm. The copper necklace landed in my hand, and something in my chest recognized it the way a body recognizes warmth after cold. The oxidized metal, dark at the edges, with the particular patina that takes years and skin contact and the chemistry of living to develop. The rough malachite at the center, exactly as imperfect as it had always been. There were two small scratches on the copper backing fine parallel lines where Caleb had pried it from the velvet box with something sharp. I ran my thumbnail over them. "You okay, ma'am?" the officer asked, not unkindly. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. I was still standing at the counter when the officer cleared his throat and said, "One more thing. A letter was delivered here this morning from a federal intake facility. The sender listed this location as the delivery point. Do you want it?" He held up a plain white envelope. My name was written on the front in handwriting. I would have recognized anywhere the particular way he hooked the tail of the capital B. I took it. I walked to the bench near the door and sat down and opened it. The letter was 2 pages written on lined paper in ballpoint pen. The handwriting was smaller than usual, compressed the handwriting of someone writing in a space with limited light. "Briar," it began. "I don't expect you to read this, but I'm going to write it anyway because there are things I need to say that I couldn't say in that room with everyone watching. I know you think everything I do is a performance. Maybe you're right. But I'm going to try to give you the truth anyway for whatever it's worth now. When I first asked you out, I didn't know who your family was. I know that sounds like the exact thing a guilty man would say, but I need you to know it. I knew you were remarkable. I knew the way you talked about light and surface and the age of materials was unlike anything I had ever heard. I fell in love with your mind before I knew anything about your bank account. But somewhere along the way, knowing about the money broke something in me. Not because I wanted it, because standing next to it made me understand how small I was. I felt like a forgery next to you, Briar. A very good reproduction, but not the real thing. And I couldn't live with that. So I stopped trying to be real and started trying to take. I know that doesn't excuse anything. I know Ivy will grow up knowing what her father did. That is the part that I cannot put down. That is the weight I will carry for the rest of my life, and I deserve every pound of it. I need you to know that I loved you. Whatever that love became, whatever I turned it into, there was a real thing underneath it in the beginning. I need you to know that." I folded the letter. I held it in both hands for exactly 5 seconds. He was doing it again. Even from a federal intake facility with a ballpoint pen and 2 pages of lined paper, Caleb Thorne was trying to reframe the story. Not I hurt you, but I was hurting. Not I chose to poison you, but the money broke something in me. The letter was beautifully constructed in the same way that all of his carefully assembled expressions of concern had been beautifully constructed, with just enough genuine feeling woven in to make the manipulation invisible to anyone who was not looking for it. I was looking for it. I walked to the trash can beside the exit door and dropped the letter in. I did not hesitate. I dropped it the way you drop something that is finished, the way you put down a tool when the work is done. Then I walked out into the cold December air and clasped the copper necklace around my neck. The metal was cold for a moment, then it was not. Ivy was at the park with Dominic when I arrived, which was the arrangement we had made so that she would have somewhere fun to be while I handled the morning's errand. The park ran along the harbor and was mostly empty on a weekday morning in December, just a pair of joggers and an older man throwing bread to a cluster of pigeons who were deeply invested in the transaction. Ivy saw me coming from 30 feet away and responded with the kind of full-body enthusiasm that only small children and golden retrievers can muster. She launched herself across the dead grass at a speed that was genuinely alarming and hit me at hip height with both arms going around me and her cold face pressed into my coat. "Mommy, we saw a seal," she announced at high volume against my ribs. "In the water, a real one." It looked at Uncle Dom, and then it went back under. "It did not look at me," Dominic said, coming up behind her. "It looked at the water." "It looked at you," Ivy said firmly with the absolute conviction of someone who was 5 and had therefore never once been wrong about anything. She grabbed my hand and began pulling me toward the waterline. "Come and see if it comes back. I think it will come back if I call it." "Seals don't come when called," Dominic said. "This one might," Ivy said. I let her pull me. The harbor was steel gray and very still under the overcast sky, and we stood at the railing for a while, the three of us, while Ivy made a series of increasingly creative sounds at the water that did not produce a seal, but did produce a deeply impressed reaction from the pigeon man, who told her she had excellent technique. Eventually, Ivy declared that the seal had probably gone for lunch, and that we should also go for lunch, and could we please have hot chocolate with the little marshmallows, the small ones. Not the big ones, because the big ones are too sweet. The big ones are too sweet, Dominic confirmed seriously. Exactly, Ivy said, and linked one hand through mine and one hand through Dominic's, and marched us toward the park exit with the energy of someone who has resolved a complex logistical problem. I looked down at her hand in mine, small and cold and utterly certain that the person holding it would not let go. I found a bench near the park gate and sat down for a moment while Dominic took Ivy to the hot chocolate cart at the corner. The morning was very quiet. A ferry moved slowly across the harbor, its wake spreading out behind it in a wide V. Somewhere in the distance, a construction crane was turning. I reached up and touched the necklace at my throat. The copper was warm now, warm to my temperature, part of my surface again. The small scratches Caleb had left were still there. I had not had them buffed out, and I was not going to. Not because I wanted to commemorate what he had done, but because I had learned something important about surfaces in 11 years of working with old things, which is that the marks of what has happened to something are not the same as damage. They are information. They are the record of how a thing has lived. The chip inside the necklace blinked its signal every 12 seconds. I had checked the sync that morning, and it had connected immediately to the Vance family servers as reliable and unchanged as it had always been. Every 12 seconds, blink, blink, blink. My father had built the original system because a man who has watched his 7-year-old daughter be taken from him does not stop preparing for the worst. And I had built everything else. GemTrace, the Nano Sentinel, the smart home systems, the fallback protocols for the same reason dressed in a different professional language. I had spent my entire career building walls around things that mattered. I had just never thought to build one around myself. Mommy! Ivy appeared at my elbow, with a paper cup in each hand, her face flushed from the cold, and completely incandescent with the pleasure of hot chocolate procurement. I got you one too, with the small marshmallows. The right ones, I said. Obviously, she said, and climbed up onto the bench beside me and leaned against my arm with the trusting, boneless lean of a child who is very warm and very happy and does not need anything in this moment except to be next to the person she loves most. I wrapped both hands around the cup and sat there with my daughter pressed against my side, and the harbor spread out before us, and the copper necklace warm at my throat, and I understood something that I had been approaching for weeks without being able to name it directly. Safety is not something you receive. It is not something a person hands you at an altar or promises you with their eyes full of tears on the steps of an art museum. It is something you build, line by line, system by system, the slow and patient work of someone who has decided that the things worth protecting are worth the labor. The chip blinked. The ferry reached the far shore. Ivy drank her hot chocolate with the focused pleasure of someone experiencing something excellent. I drank mine. The marshmallows were the right ones. Looking back, I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me before any of this began. Family betrayal doesn't announce itself with warning signs. It arrives in a cup of honey tea in 4 years of shared mornings built on a foundation you were never shown. Don't be like me. Don't wait until the evidence is forensic before you trust what you already feel. The part of you quietly counting what doesn't add up, that part has always been right. I'm not a hero in this story. Family betrayal taught me that the most important protection I could build was the one pointed inward, at my own willingness to believe what I wanted to believe. And family revenge, I'll be honest, is not what healed me. The verdict mattered, justice mattered, but what healed me was my daughter's hand in mine on a cold park bench in December, and the quiet certainty that I had built something stronger than what tried to break it. I believe God places certain people in our lives before we know we will need them. My father, my brother, and sometimes ourselves. Stories of family revenge and family betrayal all end the same way, when the right person refuses to fall. This is my personal belief. Every story of family revenge begins with someone choosing not to be a victim. Choose yourself first. If this reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and subscribe to this channel for more stories that matter. You never know whose day it might change. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. One final note, the stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and education. If that's not what you're looking for, no judgment at all. Step away and find what serves you better. But if you're staying, I'm truly glad you're here.